We'll introduce them in more detail when we move to the presentation section of today's webinar. The format for the webinar is that it will last for approximately an hour. The presentations will take around about 10 minutes each, and then we'll have plenty of time for questions and answers, which I will chair. But please do, during the presentations and then in that question and answer session, please do use the chat function to ask questions, whether they're directed at either Carole, Louisa or Sarah individually, or just questions across today's panel, and we will we'll raise those with the speakers when we get to the question and answer section. If we could ask please that you keep your microphones and cameras off during the presentation, and of course you're more than welcome to move between the speaker view and the gallery view. Two of our speakers, Carole and Sarah, will just be speaking without a presentation, but Louisa has a presentation and so a video to share as well. We'll be recording the event, and the webinar will be shared after on, we'll share it with yourselves through email, but also it will be shared on the Jubilee Centre website and through our YouTube page. We'd also like to just highlight before we get started that this is part of a wider series of webinars that the Jubilee Centre have been conducting relating to various aspects of character and virtues within schools, within universities, within the professions. And our next webinar is on digital citizenship education on the 23rd of June. And again, you can find more details of each of the webinars on the Jubilee Centre website. So to turn to today's focus in a bit more detail, the Jubilee Centre for Character and Virtues has had a long-standing commitment to youth social action and sees youth social action as an important practice for cultivating and experiencing virtues and developing character with others and within communities. At present, the Jubilee Centre has a project entitled Civic Virtues Through Service to Others, which we're investigating the nature of civic virtues, how these connect with other virtues such as moral and intellectual virtues, and how young people are forming and expressing their virtues within communities inside and beyond schools. And as with many aspects of education, the pandemic has brought constraints, has increased challenges and inequalities, but has also shone some further light on young people's compassion, care and commitment to justice, including how they enact this within community settings. And I'm sure our three speakers today will reflect on the needs for social action and the benefits in social action, both over the last 18 months, but also going forward. So without further ado, I would like to introduce you to our first speaker today, who's Carole Jones, head teacher at Yeading Junior School. Carole is an experienced and inspirational head teacher with whom we in the Centre have worked for a number of years. Carole is passionate about working with the wider community and with partners to develop children's social action. She has introduced character education into the school, including a set of virtues which are embedded in the ethos of the school and are threaded across the curriculum. In her role as head teacher, she is chair of the SACRE and a theme group in her local authority, and she actively promotes volunteering and is a trustee of a local organisation. Carole is a co-contributor to a book entitled Whole School Character and Virtue Education that was published in November in 2020. And the school has most recently gained the Kitemark Plus as a School of Character from the Association of Character Education. And in recognition of its commitment to social action, Yeading Junior School became a primary ambassador school within the I Will campaign. So Carole, thank you for being here. It's a pleasure to welcome you, and I will pass over to you now.
Thank you very much, Andrew, for that wonderful introduction. It's really good to be here this afternoon. I'd like to say that social action is an area that we are really proud of at Yeading. It's transformational, it's embedded, it's sustained, and it forms an intrinsic part of our character journey, our journey of development of character within Yeading Junior School. Community is also, as Andrew said, extremely important to us, very dear to our heart, and we have a strong focus on community in the school. The children have a really clear notion and understanding of what constitutes community, and they're aware of its needs and how its needs change over time, and how the community may need one thing at one point in time, and it might be very different at another point in time, as we're all very aware during the pandemic. Our school has been on a significant journey of character development over a number of years, and we use a holistic approach right across the curriculum. ensuring that it's woven right through our school. And as Andrew said, we've most recently gained accreditation as a Kitemark school for Character Plus, Kitemark Plus, with the ACE, the Association of Character Education. Against this backdrop, we have empowered children, and these children like to take action. They continually take focused action, and they like to progress the action, and they've got very well honed skills and abilities to do this. They work on action, whether it be local action or global action. They speak with confidence and conviction, and they've developed really intricate skills that they take back into the classroom, and they're very good at evaluating things. Well, I've painted you a picture of what character is and social action at the moment in our school, and how those children are developing characteristics. However, that wasn't the beginning of it. At the very heart and the beginning of us going on a journey, the children wanted to make a difference to others within their school. And so what they would do is they'd come together and they wanted to draw up plans with staff to, in their free time, to be able to run clubs and activities for other children. Some of these focused on newly arrived children into our school, and some were surrounding much younger children in the school. And they'd plan these activities and we'd review them together. And that was the structure at that time. And at that time, we also took on some standalone projects, and the children gained so much from those standalone projects that really convinced us that our journey should take a step further. One of the things that I noticed, and staff noticed most of all, is when they were undertaking projects with their peers, or when they were taking wider projects at the initial stage, when they went back into the classroom, their learning skills were enhanced. Not only were their learning skills were enhanced, they also were more acutely aware of virtuous attitudes. And I think that's what really convinced us about expanding that action. One of the first things we did, and the most important things, I think, was to ensure that children understood the virtue of taking action. That was a really important point, and recognizing the impact it had on themselves, but not just the impact it had on others, but also that reciprocal effect on themselves, which was really important. And the more they did, as we know, the more they wanted to do, and the more they wanted to do, the bigger the impact. And in some instances, it was the children taking particular staff members on that journey of social action at that point. As well as working with the children, it was really important that we worked with the staff. So we worked with not only the teaching, non-teaching staff, but also governors and parents. We needed them all to understand where we were going. So there was a common vision and intent within the school for the journey we were taking. And staff undertook CPD together and became quite robust in their view of the importance of children doing good, and knowing that when children were actually doing good and understanding that they would indeed flourish. We worked with the notion that every child in our school and every adult in our school had the power to make a difference and could make a positive contribution to their community. And knowing that, we decided to take on board the notion of we were all agents of change. And it was important that we worked together, because by working together, we made a bigger difference. But not only did we have agents of change, we also had some children who stepped forward with a very powerful desire to make a difference. And these were our special agents of change. And this was such a prestigious job that they indeed had to apply for the role, as you would in life, developing life skills. And not only did they apply for that role, they went through an interview process. And during that interview process, the most important thing was that they could articulate about the virtues, and that they would really understand the virtues that were in our school and how the two worked well together. One of the things that we did was actually to obviously clearly sit the 10 virtues that we had in school, which we had chosen to be the centre of all we did, alongside the social action. We brought role models in so that children could understand how these role models acted and how they in turn made differences to their community. Children looked at historical figures and what did they do and what impact could they make. They looked at people who had made a difference nationally, and across the curriculum we looked at those who made a difference also locally. But most importantly, we looked at the difference the children could make in our own school, class by class, how they were causing a sea of change. Children enjoyed hearing from particular people who would come into assemblies and would talk to them about their personal experience. And the school we've worked really hard to ensure that the children had a very clear understanding of different communities and how those different communities interlink and how those different communities join together to make an even wider whole. And we felt that was really important for the children to have that clear understanding. The school also established a resource. We've had a long-standing resource for our parents, and it's called a community house. And parents go there to learn various things about what their children are doing in school, develop skills themselves. But not only that, the pride the children developed in terms of engaging with those parents in the community house, in other projects, joint ventures together. So we would raise funds for various charities, and the children might do something in school and that would be mirrored in the community house. There were occasions that I can think of in particular, things like we worked with We Schools, and we did things like We Bake for Change. And we also did We Walk for Water. And indeed, the whole community engaged in that, not just the children in classes, but also parents and children across other schools. Children demonstrated a clear pride in their actions, but also wanted to know and wanted to understand what difference that was making. So that clearly was evaluated both in the classroom and amongst themselves with their peers. Partnerships were really important to us to establish a whole network, and I'd advise anyone to do that. The more we linked, the more opportunities we had. And we worked in a very focused way to develop those partnerships, linking with the curriculum and the activities we wanted to do. So some of our social action activities threaded out from these partnerships, and some of them threaded out from the actual classroom learning. But once we started to develop partnerships with other people and networks, they grew because one partner has a relationship with another partner. And this was also part of the process the children understood. And it linked back to their learning too. They would write letters. We would encourage them to write letters, to write case studies themselves. And we in turn case studied some of the work that the children and staff were doing. This was having a profound effect on their learning, on their attitudes, on their relationships with one another. We partnered with some national projects. We're part of Step Up to Serve and I Will. We joined with Team London, as we're in London School. We also work very closely with the Jubilee Centre, and we found that the Jubilee Centre's resources and research were absolutely invaluable to the work that we were doing and became an inspiration for us. We also worked together with a local university, and that was very helpful from the point of giving us a resource base so that when we were doing projects and activities, we could draw on the experience of staff at the university to support the children in that way. Partnering with local schools became really important. The more actions you can do together, the better the outcome. The more the children related to one another, the clearer the outcomes we had. Some of our activities in social action were born out of subject areas in school. So for example, in RE, we developed a whole raft of interfaith activities that involved not just the children, but also the parents, local schools, and the children themselves became influencers too. We've supported a local live at home scheme. So we're talking about the pandemic. We have a local live at home scheme where elderly folk wanted to learn how to use the iPad, and our children facilitated that. And it's meant during the pandemic, the children could see the outcome, that they could relate to their grandchildren, etc. And yesterday we had a virtual meeting with the group from the Live at Home scheme. And during that time, they shared experiences, the children and the members shared experience of how they use their time during lockdown, and the skills and things that they could develop. And that was really good for the children. We've also, as we've come back, we've done a lot of work with the homeless prior to lockdown. But as we came back, we noticed that resources were depleted with our local Salvation Army. So they were looking for food for their food bank. And our children got together and continued the project they were doing on the homeless. And only 2 weeks ago, the children had achieved bringing in, and staff bringing in 1,000 items of food for the local homeless in Hayes, where we are. So they could see the impact of what they were doing, and they understood the difficulty of their own immediate community and how they had shown compassion and reflection and brought that into the things that they were doing. We've also got a project running with, or Team London have got a project running with us called Game Changers, Young Ambassadors, which is the children are doing a series of exercises, Year 6 children, where they're looking at the community at the moment and the needs of the community at the moment, and refining their actions together and being helped to ensure that they could fulfill those actions, because sometimes during this time it might be very difficult for them to do that. As I mentioned before, links and community, links within the community and partnerships and networks have been very key, and the children themselves have become quite innovative in drawing out those links. They've carried this work that we've done right back into their homes and linked with local organisations themselves and drawn families into that. I believe it's very clear that our inspirational young people understand the process of doing good, and they recognise the impact on themselves and others. This recognition has spurred them on to do more. And this motivation has caused an absolute ripple effect across our school. It has engendered a pride in our community, and that goes beyond the school gate. And it will serve the children in the future, enabling them to understand society and be able to develop positive attitudes that they will take with them and enable them to succeed in whatever they're doing. Social action has been the lens in which we've looked or viewed our character development. Thank you.
Carole, thank you so much. So many powerful messages and practices and experience that you've shared there. And I'm sure that, that they'll be picked up upon again in the question and answer. So colleagues here, please do put your questions in the chat function and we will make a note of those. A couple of things that I particularly was interested in is the idea of agents of change and special agents of change, particularly underpinned by the virtues that the school focuses on, but also the importance of partnership and working in collaboration with a range of partners within the school and beyond the school, as so far as youth social action is concerned. So Carole, thank you very much. And that moves us nicely along to our second speaker today, who is Louisa Searle, the director of First Give. Louisa taught English in a secondary school in Enfield, and in 2014 moved to set up First Give, a charity that works with an incredible number of schools to encourage young people to give back to their community through advocacy, fundraising, and volunteering. I know Louisa will be saying more about the fantastic work of First Give and the very real impact that this work is having on young people in their communities. But before I hand over, I want to say that I've had the pleasure of speaking with Louisa on a number of occasions and to learn about her work and the work of First Give. And I've always been immediately struck by Louisa's passion and by the very positive and hopeful vision of young people and social action that underpins the work of First Give. And I'm sure we'll hear some more examples, particularly perhaps a boy called Alfie, in what Louisa has to say. So I'm sure you'll join me in giving a very warm welcome to Louisa. Louisa, thank you for being here, and I'll hand over to you now.
Thank you, Andrew, and thank you for those very kind words. It's really fabulous to be here. I do have a presentation which the team at the Jubilee Centre have been good enough to share, and I think Joe's going to do that for me. Thank you, Joe. And I will be doing my best Chris Whitty impression by just asking him to move the next slide along when I need to. So yeah, my name's Louisa. I have the privilege and honour of leading First Give, which is a charity that is one of the partners, a bit like that Carole, a leader like Carole, might work within a school, but we work with secondary schools. It's my very great pleasure to talk to you today about our role in this very interesting field of work around youth social action, community and character. Joe, if you could move the next slide along, that would be fab. So today I'm going to talk to you a bit about First Give, because I'm conscious that not everyone here will know who we are. We are small, but we are mighty. I will also run through our theory of change and how that underpins everything that we believe in and what drives us, and how we see schools and education as being critical to that. I'll also share with you some of the learnings that we took in terms of social action throughout the pandemic, and some of the extraordinary stories that we saw as we tried to deliver our programme to young people across England and Wales. And I'll finish with some final thoughts about youth social action and the role of education and, of course, schools. So, Joe, if you could move the next slide along, that would be great. Thank you. So our tagline, if you distilled us down into a sentence, we are about empowering young people and igniting that spark of social conscience. We do that through a programme that students will primarily experience as a project they do in lessons, usually in citizenship, PSHE or RE, sometimes even in their English curriculum. And it's delivered through a fully resourced scheme of work that is comprehensive and easy for teachers to deliver, that's supplemented by sessions that my team go in and deliver. So an assembly, a workshop, and then a final. And the programme is structured as a competition where each class in a year group is competing to win £1,000 for a cause, a charity of their choice. But I'm not going to say any more, because I've actually shared a video which I'm hoping we can play, which illustrates it a bit better than I can describe it. So Joe, if you could work your magic, that would be amazing.
So today's event is obviously a celebration of all of you. You've all been involved in First Give, and today we're going to be hearing all about the work that you have all done on the programme.
First Give exists to inspire young people to make a difference to the causes that they care about. If you give young people the opportunity to do good, they will absolutely run with it.
So let's get some ideas about what different types of social issues there are.
We chose Noah's Ark Charity Hospital for our First Give project.
My class supported EdAction.
My class supported City Hospice.
So we just came out from meeting our charity for the first time, and we are really excited to be working with them in the future, because we've learned all about what they do and how the £1,000 would benefit them if we won.
They've been amazing. I don't think we've ever had someone so passionate about trying to raise money for us.
The key thing here is that I want you to make sure that you can be heard even right at the back of the room, and that you use your best public speaking skills.
Getting our kids involved in things and our students involved in things that are important in the community, and seeing that school as a positive force within the community and doesn't sit outside their local community, seeing that through kind of positive action and careful planning, they can affect change.
All of the causes were really local, they all meant something to the kids, and I think that's where the magic of First Give really is. It's connecting young people and the community in a way that's really unique. Super. Thank you so much. And I think that that Joe is going to share the link to that for you guys if you want to revisit it, and it is on our website as well. We are about providing a platform and the motivation to young people to, within school, explore social issues that matter to them and that affect their communities, but to take action to do something about it. The £1,000 is obviously the initial motivation, but really by the time the programme finishes, the take-home message is that every student in the year group will have done something meaningful and tangible for their communities. It is a real-world project with real-world outcomes. And I just want to share with you our theory of change, because I think it really aligns with some of the discourse that I've seen around around virtues and character education. So Joe, if you can move on to the next slide. So I'll just walk you through this particular slide. So for us, our theory of change, if you start on with the purple on the right-hand side, you always have to read it backwards. So our vision, the thing that we're truly aiming for, is a generation of motivated and equipped young people using their skills to make the lives of others. And for us, this idea of a more generous generation and long-term active citizenship, I think really speaks to what I've seen in the building blocks of character, this idea of flourishing individuals and a flourishing society. And for us, we really believe that young people are the key to that. And so these are the things that we want to be nurturing in our young people: the improved awareness of social issues, empathy, completing social action, and improving their skills. And for us, the mechanisms of change here, young people, schools, and charities, are critical to do that in order to achieve those outcomes for young people. And so we know that in order to do that, we must influence those mechanisms of change. And that's why schools are so central to our vision. We know that in order to be effective, we have to provide something that is attractive and relevant for schools. And you can see here that our main input is our programme delivery, and school partnerships are critical to that. Because we know that's where young people are. And I'll talk later about schools as being the great equaliser in terms of access to social action opportunities, and why, therefore, I think it's so important that we continually ask schools to engage with us in this kind of work. Now, it won't have escaped your notice that that video was shot pre-pandemic. And our social action programme is predicated on the idea of young people coming together, a whole year group and classes working within school to affect social change through their actions. And for us, a lot of social action is often, but not always, done, physically with others. And so as schools closed in March 2020, we were presented with a serious problem for a small charity, but also a real kind of threat to what we were aiming to do, which is, how do we support young people to give back to their communities through their education when effectively that key partner, that key mechanism of change has kind of been taken away in terms of the physicality of it. And so we actually, my team, and I'm incredibly proud of the work they did to deliver this, within 2 weeks of schools closing in March 2020, developed an alternative to support young people through that very difficult period. So Joe, the next slide, please, illustrates that, the mini programme that we came up with. Oh, sorry, no, it doesn't. It comes up with some of our stats. Sorry, I've got ahead of myself. So I just wanted to share with you the fact that it works, the fact that lots of students say they improve their skills, that they develop their empathy, and indeed their teachers agree with them. And then on the next slide, Joe, we also talk about the impact on the community. And I think, again, this idea of social action and community, the fact is that we talk a lot about young people and the impact they will have as young leaders and these future skills we want to foster in them, but there is an immediate benefit to young people engaging in this kind of work. So through their efforts, over £800,000 has been raised and granted for charities and one from us, but also £175,000 has been raised by them as well. And I think what's always really interesting is looking at those top three causes that young people champion. And those, again, were kind of pre-pandemic. And actually, I think as the last year has gone on, I think we've definitely seen some shifts in this, but also actually in some ways an enhancement of young people's awareness of social issues and the ones that particularly matter to them. So I will now talk about our pandemic offer and talk to you about some of the learnings that we were able to take from that. So Joe, the next slide, please. So our mini programme, our offer for First Give students during lockdown was First Give Helping from Home. Similar in scope and in purpose to our original programme, but different in that it was designed specifically to be delivered over a three lesson period. For students working from home, we made it available for teachers, parents, and for young people themselves, accompanied by PDFs that they could edit on their computers, so no need to print, but also some PowerPoints and videos to support them. The idea was that social action would be geared towards community support that in a way that was safe, but also that young people would link it to an online competition. So, so there would be, they would share their social action online in order to win money for causes that matter to them. So in the first sort of wave of school closures, there would be £250 per month for 2 students who had really demonstrated extraordinary social action. And then in the second lockdown, we actually upped that prize money just because we felt that there was a real need for young people to be inspired during a very dark January there. And I'll just share with you some of the case studies that we were able to see from that period. So if you could move to the next slide, Joe. So young people really demonstrated some really interesting and innovative pieces of social action through that period. The first, sorry, Joe, yes, there we go, was Rio, who built bird nesting boxes from old pallets for people in his community in Rhymney and South Wales. And we definitely saw almost immediately this real focus on the idea of loneliness and of isolation. And it was amazing how tapped into that young people were. And he put kind of bird spotting cards into these bird houses so that people who were isolated in his community could see them and sort of use them in order to be uplifted by nature. So he was one of our first winners. And I think, you know, loneliness is not something that often young people on First Give sort of address, but very quickly that was obviously something that they wanted to. We had year groups of children writing letters to people in care homes to reach out to them. And it was definitely a theme that ran throughout this online competition. If you could move on to the next slide, please, Joe, that would be fab. Similarly, I found that young people were also focused on some of the most vulnerable and taking direct practical action in order to support them. So this was a young lady in South Wales who, you know, wanted to raise awareness, she wanted to advocate, but she also wanted to practically help. And so her action was all about sort of supporting the homeless in her community. And, you know, it was just clear that young people are very good, I find, at finding tangible solutions through kind of micro activities, which I always am really inspired by. They totally click into those kind of basic needs of others. And this was a demonstration of that for us. If you can move on to the next slide, please, Joe. So one of our sort of standout winners, I guess, from February, really, so only a couple of months ago, was Alfie. And Alfie made little packet bags of happiness for key workers in his community in Mountain Ash and the valleys in Wales again. And he did this, he went round to shops and collected donations and then packaged them up with a little note while he was watching Coronation Street with his mum, and handed them out to key workers, but not just to key workers as in hospitals, but to key workers that are often less celebrated in communities. He gave dustbin men to the postman, to train drivers and train conductors, and to the local priest. And the reason why I know so much about Alfie is because he ended up being interviewed on not one, but 2 radio shows, one a local radio show and one by Carole Jones. And I've actually shared in the, or I've asked to be shared in the chat, the link to the local radio show, because if you have 17 minutes over a cup of tea, it is a total joy to listen to. a really wonderful kind of example of just how a young person can be passionate, empathetic, and just really inspirational, actually. And he talks really interestingly about his motivations for doing this kind of social action. And I think for me, what Alfie exemplified was a more sophisticated understanding of community and what drives community and who is supporting the community. And I think that's what lots of young people have come to understand over the last year. And I really think that because of the pandemic and the focus on the NHS and key workers, but also because of Black Lives Matter and some of the gender-based violence we've seen in Wales and Kent at the beginning of this year, that young people over the next few months are going to be incredibly motivated and galvanized to make a difference. And I absolutely believe that schools like Carole's and programs like First Give have a real urgency and need to provide that platform to as many young people as possible. Because I think that there's never been a more important time for students to be encouraged to think outside of themselves in this way, having gone through such a challenging period. If you could move on to the next slide, please, Joe, that would be super. There's a small quote from Alfie, I think, and yeah, I just saw someone wanting the radio link, which I think is definitely coming in the pack. So yeah, that was Alfie's quote, and yeah, do listen to his radio interview if you get a chance. You could go to the next slide, please, Joe, that would be great. And I just wanted to talk to this again, you know, this idea of the flourishing individuals in society, and I've lifted this with permission from the Jubilee Centre's website on character education. First Give obviously sits, you know, initially you sort of think that it would sit in the civic virtues column and kind of stay in that lane, but do I see judgment, autonomy, resourcefulness, compassion, courage, you know, integrity and confidence and determination from young people on First Give? I absolutely do. And I think that social action really kind of sits across all of these things in order to give young people these qualities and these characteristics. And it honestly is truly inspirational to be part of this kind of work. And I just wanted to speak very briefly about the role of schools as we come out of this period. You know, the fact is that First Give, we delivered this program online, out of schools while schools were closed. Students could do it themselves, but we absolutely need teachers to be the driving force behind this. A lot of research has been done about the socioeconomic gap between students from high socioeconomic backgrounds and lower, and rates of participation in social action. And actually schools really are that great equalizer, and that is why First Give is designed the way it is. We insist that every student in the year group takes part in the programme. It's not an opt-in for the gifted and talented or for those who would just like to. We insist that everyone should do that because we understand that schools are necessary in order to reach, you know, every student deserves to have exposure to these kinds of ideas. And there was a sort of quote that I was really struck by Dr. Eddie Hogg from the University of Kent. He says that the influence on young people's volunteering would seem to be key. The influence of school on young people's volunteering would seem to be key to creating opportunities for young people from a wide range of socioeconomic backgrounds to volunteer, particularly in Key Stage 3. So that age when they're starting to be interested in the world around them, where they may not be able to do things so autonomously. And so when the job of encouraging engagement is left to formal groups and organisations, then the role of schools is key. And that's the quote that I will finish on. Joe, if you could just finish on that slide for me, please. So it makes the role of schools and the organisations who work with schools vital. And I think, as I said, there's an urgency to this work as we come out of the pandemic and a real need for it. And yeah, I think that it's going to be an interesting year for social action and education. Thank you very much. Welcome any questions when it is time.
Fantastic, Louisa, thank you very much. And the link to the interview with Alfie is there in the chat function, and I would wholeheartedly recommend anybody to have a listen to that. It's certainly inspirational and moving, and actually it connects very nicely with the messages that Louisa has been giving At the centre, we might, in the Civic Virtues project, we use the term civic character with a heart. And one of the things that really struck me in Louisa's presentation right near the beginning, that's about providing children with the opportunities to be good and to do good. And I think that's really important, particularly in today's current climates. So we will move on to our third presenter this afternoon, which is my colleague, Sarah Ritzenthaler, who's a colleague of mine in the Jubilee Centre for Character and Virtues. Sarah joined the Jubilee Centre in May of last year, just as the lockdown was in effect, as a research fellow. And prior to this, she worked for 3 years on policy and parliamentary liaison for the Legal Ombudsman. Sarah's been working on Centre's research project on civic virtues through service to others. And as part of her work and her wider work within the Centre, Sarah has been involved with our colleague Aidan Thompson in interviewing ambassadors for the I Will campaign to understand their experiences of youth social action. And that's something that Sarah is going to talk about now. So Sarah, I'll hand over to you.
Thanks very much, Andrew. Hello, everyone. It's so lovely to see so many of you here. And thank you to Carole and to Louisa for some really excellent presentations. It's so encouraging to see and hear all about the various different things that are going on at the moment. I'm here to talk to you a little bit about what the Jubilee Centre has found through research. And we've undertaken several research studies on youth social action and its connection to character, which have examined the concept of the double benefit. Now, some of you may be familiar with that term, some of you may not, but essentially it's what Louisa was talking about earlier, effectively the effects on both individuals and society. And through the Centre's research, it's actually been demonstrated that there is a benefit of social action, not only to the communities, the many different communities that I think Carole spoke about as well, that a young person is working for, but also that young person themselves, their character. And this is essentially the why of youth social action. Helping young people to become involved in social action helps them to develop virtues that will allow them to flourish throughout their lives. And it helps communities to then flourish alongside them. So what kind of virtues? Well, we've already heard at the end of Louisa's presentation there about the building blocks of character that we have in the Jubilee Centre's framework for character education, made up of 4 different types of virtues: the moral virtues, the civic virtues, the intellectual virtues, and the performance virtues. But largely we see through our research that young people initially and instinctively prioritize the performance virtues, so things like leadership, confidence, resilience, determination. But other things that have come up, other virtues, include respect and communication and open-mindedness, and those we would consider more intellectual virtues. But interestingly, young people don't necessarily use the language of things like civic and moral virtues, but that doesn't actually mean that they don't value them. Our research has shown that those that have made a habit out of service to their communities identify themselves more closely with exemplars of moral and civic virtues. So it's clear to them that this is important to them, but we need to give that language to them as well. Overall, in considering why it's important to do social action, there's strong evidence that it allows young people to seek their own character development in ways that are meaningful to them within supportive educational environments. But it is important not to make the mistake that we are selling social action to young people. Largely, the evidence suggests actually that they have passions and they care about issues. And I loved the phrase about igniting the spark, because really that's what you're doing. It's essentially just giving them a matter of allowing them to explore the matters that care to them, that they care about. Give them opportunities to put their passions that already exist into action. And actually the young people in those videos and in those case studies clearly have a lot of passion. And that came through strongly in the interviews with the I Will ambassadors that we did late summer last year. In fact, I'll read a quote from one of those, because I think it sums it up very well. One young person, one of the ambassadors, said that I think the narrative that young people aren't interested, that they're lazy or they're not engaged is quite an easy one to perpetuate and an easy thing to say. And it's much harder to actually take young people who have passions and don't know what to do with them and try and harness that energy. And I think that's something really important for everybody in this Zoom call today to take away, is actually it's about harnessing what is already there. Certainly the report that then came out of those interviews that we did, we conducted them with 15 young ambassadors who were associated with the I Will campaign, which came from Step Up to Serve, which was set up in 2013 and wrapped up at the end of 2020. But the I Will campaign itself lives on. And these ambassadors were exemplars of social action and service to their communities. And they were people that were very passionate about making a difference. And so out of that came a report called Leaders of Now, which hopefully there will be a link to in the chat for you. But essentially it had three main findings. First of all, that there was strong support for the double benefit. So this concept that there was benefit both to the community and to the character of young people. And as Carole spoke about, the skills and the virtuous attitudes that children at her primary school develops and show through youth social action, actually that came out very strongly in older young people as well. So the age range that we interviewed was something between about 16 and 25. But also this concept of influencing others and being supported by each other was another main finding. So inspiring other people was very important, but also being inspired by other young ambassadors. So we found that young people really have a passion to be role models for each other. And actually role modeling and student leadership are really important within social action as well. Several of them also mentioned that they were spurred into action by being informed about issues in classes, as we actually saw in the first Give video as well. Starting them thinking about those particular ideas within their lessons can be a really important spark. And again, I also loved that the agents of change. Actually, that's another thing that came out in the ambassador interviews. One of the ambassadors described themselves as part of a generation of change. And I think that's so exciting and something that we can really capture to help young people to think about their own character. The final thing that came through in that report was talking about challenging stereotypes and defining young people's lives through youth social action. So what's something that we don't necessarily consider as much is that it can be a really important way for young people to take control of their own lives and futures and their development, especially those from challenging or disadvantaged backgrounds. And as Louisa mentioned, that those harder to reach people. But many of the ambassadors actually talked about the fact that their personal struggles with racism, sexism, poor mental health, experiences with terrorism even, and bullying. And these things were things that they were able to process through social action, and they were given a language, if you like, of overcoming. So most of them recognized the virtues and the benefits of social action, but weren't able to give a voice to exactly what that was. So with the help of the organization, with the help of I Will, they were able to do that, or through their schools providing that language as well. So I think that's something that's really important. And I think it's something truly valuable about being able to give young people a sense of hope and control over their own lives, especially in the context of this pandemic, where otherwise that might be lacking, where they might not be able to have access to that in other spheres of their life. And centre studies in general, such as the habit of service study, which again, I hope we'll link to in the chat, have found that youth social action needs to be essentially embedded in a school, in a college, in a university environment. It needs to connect to the life worlds of the young person, so their family, their friends, and it needs to be opportunity giving, essentially giving opportunities to connect with others, to serve, and to reflect. Reflection is so important, and as Carole mentioned, that the buy-in of staff members is therefore very important to allow and foster that reflection that comes with social action. But underpinning all of it are these virtues, the civic and moral virtues. And one of the young ambassadors said, it's helpful to also see what kind of virtues are important to you and what characteristics you hold really strongly, which could be different to other people in a team. Recognizing that was actually quite helpful, seeing where I need to have other people around me to balance me and fill in the gaps that I do not have. And she was talking about the virtues there of reflection. So that's another really important part that's come out in our studies. But essentially helping young people to have the time, the skills, the opportunity, and the confidence, and then believing in them are the most important things that schools can really do. Helping them to recognize the benefits to themselves and to others, and encouraging them to think about moral exemplars and showing them how they can do the same thing in their own lives, even in small ways. It's so important. There's much more information in our reports on habit of service and building character through youth social action. But hopefully this has given you some starting points to think about within the context of your own organisation. The I Will campaign as well lives on, so do check out their website as well for more ideas and opportunities. There are some really inspiring stories from the ambassadors there. But I'll leave it there for now, and I'll hand back to Andrew.
Sarah, thank you very much. And thank you again to Carole and Louisa as well. We have roughly 10 minutes for question and answers. So I will try and keep a track of the questions as they come up. Please do feel free to put more questions on. I've made a note of the questions that have been raised so far. And if I can ask Carole, Louisa and Sarah in their answers to be as succinct as possible, that might mean that we can get through some further questions. One other thing for me to say is that some of the questions that are coming up and some of the answers, I'm sure, and some further answers and thoughts about these can be gathered through the Centre's research projects on youth social action that Sarah has mentioned, but also on our CPD programme. I know that Carole took part in, and this is a free CPD programme on leading character education in school, and that you can find more details of on the Jubilee Centre websites. And there's a whole section of that programme on enrichment and relates very closely and includes indeed social action. So let's get to some questions. Now, the first question, had a number of questions. Sorry if I'm pronouncing your name incorrectly, from Mikhail. And the first question Mikhail asked related really to the age range. And I know that Carole, you're in a junior school, and Louisa, you've worked with students of a whole range of different ages, and Sarah, your interviews with perhaps with young people who are a bit older. But what age range, did you see any differences between the age ranges? Are there particular age groups that are more interested? Back in the days of citizenship education, there was a big study about 10 years ago that saw a drop off at Key Stage 4, for example, of between 14 to 16-year-olds in youth social action. So just any reflections you have about age and development and the most interest in social action. Carole, if we could start with you, and then I'll come to yourself, Louisa.
Yes, certainly. I mean, the children we have in our school, junior children, aged 7 to 11, I would say that our year sixes are incredibly passionate and driven, and likewise with the year fives. But I'd have to argue that so are our year threes in terms of tenacity. I think we can't underestimate when you begin to do this. And I'm sure there's some younger ones, even in year 2, who are showing that enthusiasm before they come into school. It's just how much guidance and support they would need to have. But I don't think you can ever begin too early to teach that.
Thanks, Carole. Louisa.
Yeah, I'd completely agree with Carole in terms of the secondary space. We work with years 7, 8, 9 and 12. So 11 with the oldest being sort of 17-year-olds. And, you know, they bring different things to the table. And I don't think you can predict or kind of quantify when someone will become inspired by this sort of work in their lifetime. So, yeah, completely agreed.
Great, thanks, Louisa. And Sarah?
Yeah, I think the evidence is actually that the earlier they get involved, the better. I think there are different forms of social action that are easier to access at different age levels, but certainly, I think there's evidence that says if they get involved in social action before the age of 10, they're actually more likely to engage in it throughout the rest of their lives. So it's never too early to start, I think.
Fantastic. And I know if Ali is still with us, a colleague, Alison Boddy, who's been in attendance from the University of Kent, is doing research on young children's, particularly primary school children's engagement in service, philanthropy and citizenship. So do look up Alison's work in this area as well. Moving on to another question, Carole, this one's specifically from you, from a colleague called Elia. Again, apologies if I pronounced that incorrectly, but Elia's asked, what is, could you say a bit more about what the community house is, please?
Yeah, just in a nutshell, we have taken advantage of a building on our school grounds. It was formerly a caretaker's house, and we set it up to have, first of all, health promotion and bring parents in and advise them on a whole range of things. And it's become different altogether now. Parents go in there, they can study for NVQs, they can access a range of courses sometimes from the local authority as well. It's driven from school. Parents can work alongside their children. They can keep up with their children, they can engage in the social action projects. And we also periodically have social work students from university as key workers working with the children and with their families. It's proved invaluable. The number of visits are incredible. The difference to the school is fantastic. So if you have a premises, I would certainly advise it. If you want any help, you can certainly come and discuss it with us.
Fantastic. Thank you, Carole. Now, Mikhail, again, going back to Mikhail, has asked a few questions really that all stem around or or collate around the principle about the issues that might be involved. So how much of a free rein do you give pupils to investigate the issues that matter to them? And how much, and I think when Michael says, do you push students to tackle social issues they're not comfortable with? I don't think that is necessarily like in a sort of a dictatorial way, but how can, through youth social action, can we help and support young people to engage with issues that perhaps are less visible, or that they might be less comfortable with, or that just take them outside of their, to some extent, their comfort zone, but perhaps better phrased, take them outside their immediate experiences to widen their experiences. So perhaps, Louisa, if we could start with you, and then I'll come to Carole and then to Sarah.
Yeah, great question. Thank you. So our ambition is always to start local, to get young people to think locally and to look at the world around them, because we think then they can actually see the impact they're going to have. Beyond that, we actually don't set any parameters around what they can choose to do, because I think that if a young person is particularly inspired or motivated by a particular cause, then it's not for us adults to dictate instead what that should be. And I just want them, as I said, it's about igniting that spark. And if that's holistic, if that's mental health, if that's animal welfare, that's fine. But we do, in our resources, give them exposure to a huge range of different issues that perhaps they might not have thought about in their day-to-day life. But beyond that, I think they need to be allowed to find that path themselves.
Great, thank you, Louisa. And yourself, Carole?
Yeah, I think I certainly agree with you, Louisa. I think from our perspective, they have been issues that have come up through the community, issues that children have brought to the fore. And there have also been things that we've added into the mix that the children have been interested in terms of topics or activities that they've been engaged in. And there's also the ones that they've then taken outside with their families, particularly things like climate change, some very pertinent things where I can think of a particular case where family then went off and started planting together because we'd been planting in school, and it grew into something within the locality. So certainly engaging with the community, and certainly part of the curriculum that we're delivering. So children do have a chance to put their views forward and make decisions about some of the things that we're doing.
Thanks, Carole. And Sarah, is this something that came up in your interviews with the ambassadors?
Yeah, definitely. Certainly, it came through very strongly that the ambassadors tended to get involved in social action that had a relation to things that they had experienced in their own lives. And I think there's a later question in the chat that talks about how do you get young people to engage where they don't want to particularly contribute to their community, or they haven't ever been exposed to other people's suffering. I think the key really is to get them to think about the things that have affected their lives. Certainly the ambassadors spoke about, if they'd had health problems, then invariably they ended up in some form of health volunteering. And so getting young people to think about the things that they have been through as well, even in very small ways that have touched their own lives, can really help them to consider how they can then have an impact on other people and alleviating that particular suffering in others as well. So I think that's a way that can build a bridge from something that's quite personal to something that relates more to their society.
Great. Sarah, thank you. And I just wondered then, just one final quick question that's a follow-up really on that, is about how to engage children and young people who may, for valid reasons, feel that they haven't been listened to, and they don't necessarily have that sense of self-efficacy. So perhaps, Louisa, if I could come to you on that, to sort of try and rebuild their confidence and trust in communities and that they will be listened to.
Yeah, and I think that's incredibly tricky when you have students who've had a negative experience about how they're seen or perceived in their communities and their role within it. Our model, I guess, is based on structure and about creating this sort of, it's done through a lesson, it's experienced as a lesson. What I find actually is that a lot of young people use First Give and the lessons that they have with them to talk about particular challenges in their lives that are really very profound. And actually the program provides this structure and a safe space for them to explore them with their peers, and in turn their peers use it as an opportunity to support each other. So I've had students presenting to year groups and announcing that they are, you know, clients of the local food bank or the local women's refuge centre, etc., etc. Really very moving, and it's provided a way for the whole school community to come together to support those young people. So I think it's about, it has to be in schools, right? Because it's this equalizing environment. It's where everyone, you know, if in a good school, it's where everyone's listened to and supported. And for me, I think that's really key, is it's this safe sort of nurturing space that I hope, you know, that schools in partnership with First Give, we can all work to achieve.
Great, Louisa, thank you. Well, we're just a little bit over time of our 5 o'clock finish. So I want to thank everybody who's attended the webinar. It's been a pleasure to have you with us, and thank you very much for taking your valuable time. I'd also like, of course, to thank our 3 speakers, Carole, Louisa and Sarah, for sharing their experiences and their wisdom on youth social action. We've learned a great deal today, and it's been fantastic to hear the different approaches, but also just the similarities and the commonalities and those core building blocks about developing youth social action with a character focus and connecting schools and children with their communities. As we said at the beginning, the recording will be shared through email, but also available on the website and through the Jubilee Centre's YouTube channel. And if you want to make contact or any follow-up questions, please do get in contact either at the Centre's general email address or with myself or Sarah or our colleague David Searle, and our details again on the Centre's website with regard to the civic virtues through service to others project. So again, thank you all, and thank the speakers. Wish you all a safe and happy evening, afternoon, morning, wherever you are in the world. Thanks again, and take care. Good night.